Get on board the Bernier bus train. Come get on board the Bernier bus train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Oh, get on board the Bernier bus train.
Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Or bust. It's a bold statement, and it's looking more and more as though Donald Trump will be our next president, and that is not anybody's hope or intention on the Bernie or on the Bernie Sanders, true Sanders supporters team. But we talked about Max Blumenthal about a week ago, who's been since arrested. And most of us on the left believe that he's been arrested in retaliation for a number of very cogent and damning articles that he's written recently. But it's trumped up charges based on things that happened 5 months ago, but we don't believe it. We think it's because he's a dissident voice and he's getting above the line that we talked about. His name is getting known, and I think they're not going to have it. But he said, and it was a very chilling realization, that Donald Trump is nearly a foregone conclusion. Because from what he can see, there isn't any way they're going to let Bernie win the Democratic nomination. Thomas Piketty is the reason that the Democrats are wrong. So the mainstream Democrats, they haven't looked at the way poor and poorly educated voters will vote in this election cycle based on 70 years of data of election polling in France, in the United Kingdom, and in the United States. Now this kid on Timcast, he understands this somewhat, and then somewhat he doesn't. So I'm going to let him start out here, and then we'll see what we think about what he says.
From record fundraising, to Moody's Analytics predicting a Trump easy win, and now to Bernie or bust, the Democrats have already lost, and they don't even know it yet.
That part is probably true. The Democrats have already lost, and they don't even know it yet. And you can tell they don't know it by the fake polls. You can see where the mainline Democrats are. So that's probably the premise of this Bernie or Bust episode, is that the Democrats have already lost and they don't even know it. But before you go blaming Bernie or Bust, as some people will, you need to understand what we'll talk about in a few minutes about Thomas Piketty and poor and poorly educated voters.
Imagine some of them do, though, because they're panicking. I did a story recently about a Democrat fundraiser where they were worried, is there anybody else? But I'll tell you this. The biggest problem the Democrats face is not Donald Trump. It is not Donald Trump. It's not the economy. It's not the forecast models. It is not impeachment. It's not Ukraine. None of this matters. You know what matters? Is the Democratic Party is in a state of civil war. Bernie or bust is a warning. Ignore it, and Trump wins. You heard it. Bernie supporters are saying either you vote for Bernie or we sabotage it all. Okay, it's a little harsh. What they're really saying is, we ain't voting for anybody else. And I'll tell you what, I hear that. Because I know who I want to vote for, and I ain't voting for anybody else. You know what that means? Trump wins, period. Trump is an individual with a massive base. They're going to vote for Trump. There are people who are not Republicans, they are Trumpians. They like Trump, they vote for Trump. They weren't Republicans before, they aren't Republicans now, they're going to vote for Trump. But there are Republicans who say, we just want to win. They're going to vote for Trump. But what about everybody else? Well, Bernie's got a big base, not big enough to win. Tulsi's got us.
That's where he's wrong. He doesn't understand. He sees the visible part of Bernie's base, but he doesn't see the invisible part, which is poor and poorly educated voters. Now, this guy will assume that the invisible base, that people who typically don't vote at all, will vote for Trump. And some will, because they perceive him as a populist, and they perceive maybe that he would try to get their jobs back or any of the other false, fake news that he's spewed. But if you look at the research of Piketty, what you see is that people will vote for someone who is a social democrat. That's what they call them in Europe. Somebody who would actually vote or actually work to help the labor force have better wages, better working conditions, better medical insurance, better life overall. And that's what he's showing. Over 70 years, he's showing that someone like Bernie is a lot more attractive to these invisible non-voters than someone who could be perceived as a right-wing person. A left-wing person has won those votes over the last 70 years. The word socialism is problematic, but a social democrat is really what we're talking about. And that's where the voters who are hurting, who are desperately hurting, like people in Flint, Michigan. Watched Rashida Tlaib this morning with Bernie Sanders. I watched that when I woke up. And people who have no clean drinking water, who have horrible schools, and it isn't just in Michigan, it's in Philadelphia's schools are horrible from what a lot of the kids at Millersville tell me. And so we've got these people who are hurting all over, and they typically don't vote. So those are the voters that Bernie will get that nobody seems to notice. The establishment Democrats don't notice, but this guy doesn't seem to notice either. We're going to try to put comments under this video that will wake him up a little, because he has a lot of things right. And a lot of his conclusions are correct, but his primary conclusion is incorrect. And he seems like maybe if you really showed him the data, he might understand, because he used to be a Bernie supporter. He says he likes Bernie. He doesn't have an agenda. He doesn't have an ingrained hatred of Bernie. He has a bone to pick with him, and he'll get to that in a minute, which he's wrong about. So if you could show this guy, maybe he's got 151,000 views on this video here. He's got a lot of people following him. It may be that we could talk to his viewers and show them, if they are similarly inclined, that Bernie could beat Donald Trump. But he's right that if we don't get Bernie the nomination, it's all over. And let's go. He has some good things to say about how they're propping up Elizabeth Warren, and he says some obvious things about Joe Biden.
You know, decent-sized base, got a lot of supporters on the anti-war left. Not enough to win. Yang, not enough to win. Biden, come on, man. Biden couldn't raise $1, right? So he's got, I'm kidding. I mean, he raised the money, but no way. I'll tell you what happens. I think Warren takes the nomination. I did think it was going to be Kamala Harris because of intersectionality, but I think Warren takes the nomination. I think the reason why she's not talking about Hillary and Tulsi like everyone else is because she wants to court the establishment. Elizabeth Warren is the safety, is their plan B, right? She is very much so a Hillary Clinton type, but she plays to the Bernie base. That's their plan. You see how this works? Yep. They're hoping Bernie Sanders voters will support Elizabeth Warren, but guess what?
We're not.
They're not going to do it.
Nope.
I know, because for one, I used to be a big Bernie fan. I know the mentality, but I actually have had some conversations with some Bernie supporters who straight up said they wouldn't support a Bernie Warren ticket. They do not like Warren, and they will not vote for her. Guess what? Democrats, your party's split in half. You've lost already. Check out what this guy writes for Newsweek. He says, Bernie or Bust 2.0 is a pledge that
This guy is Victor Tiffany. This is the article we mentioned about, well, when it came out, we mentioned it.
Bernie Sanders' revolutionary supporters take to send a message to the members of the Democratic Party. It is a commitment to vote for a true progressive on November 3rd, 2020. Or bust does not mean staying home. It does not mean writing in a candidate who has not registered as such. It means voting for a genuinely progressive candidate who is actually running, who reflects a voter's values, and who is not a means to perpetuate the neoliberal machinery that has been in place for more than 40 years. Bernie or bust is a demand. If you prefer another candidate and vote for that candidate in the primaries, you will need to acknowledge that you are ensuring another 4 years of Donald Trump. This is a threat! You will need to acknowledge that you are ensuring another 4 years of Donald Trump. Oh, I read that. While all burners are helping bend the arc of history toward justice, Bernie or busters are the adults in the room. Woo! I gotta say, I got a lot of respect for the Bernie voters. I will not vote for the lesser of two evils. I'm not going to vote for Bernie, but I can respect those who are saying the same thing, that I am going to support someone of principle or no one. Good. Good on you. That's principle. I respect that. Bernie or bust is a Ralph Nader problem. But unlike in 2000, Democrats can easily solve this problem by nominating Sanders. And there's the threat. If you don't support our guy, we ain't with you anymore. And Trump will win. That is bold. The climate change crisis demands a progressive form of governance to mobilize resources on a grand enough scale to transform the energy sector from fossil fuels to renewables, capture carbon from the atmosphere, and determine the safest manner to help cool the planet, then implement that plan.
So he reads that, and he agrees with it, and then he still says he wants to vote for Donald Trump. And that's the part. I'm looking at him, and he seems like a bright, young man. He seems really on top of things. He seems to follow a lot of the same information that I follow. But how could he conclude that we're going to avoid catastrophe in the climate, in the crisis we're facing, with Donald Trump steering the ship?
And race, gender, and so forth are unimportant compared with policy. Hey, wait a minute. I like that, right?
Yeah, because he also rails against identity politics. As a right-winger, you'd expect him to rail against identity politics, but identity politics are stupid no matter where you are on the political spectrum.
Yes, we welcome a woman president. Yes, we welcome a gay president. However, identity politics are always trumped by policies that will be carried out by someone who will do more than pay lip service to the kinds of change that will benefit the vast majority of Americans. I have respect for that too. Absolutely. Now tell Bernie to retract his statement about white people not knowing what it's like to be poor, and...
Now that's just a cheap shot. That's like people saying, oh, Bernie's so old. It's just all smear. Why would you say... I mean, he's quoting something out of context about Bernie saying something... What this guy is kind of a white supremacist here. What he's saying is he doesn't think Bernie should be slapping around white people and telling them that they don't know what it feels like. I mean, I'm not a right winger. That's my problem. I don't feel insulted when somebody tells me how they feel about being poor. I don't feel insulted when they tell me how it feels to be a minority, to be profiled by the police. Why should I feel insulted? If I do feel insulted, then methinks thou doth protest too loudly. Then I'm feeling guilty. Why would I feel guilty? Unless I'm acknowledging that I'm part of the problem. Kid, I think you're acknowledging that you're part of the problem here if you feel stung by that kind of criticism. And if that's all you have against Bernie right there, that's petty, that's silly. How could you vote for a fascist? And he'll talk about that word, and we'll talk more about the word fascist in a minute. But this is silly. You got nothing to say that Bernie isn't worthy of your vote more than Donald Trump.
Maybe we'll talk. Bernie or Bust is a battle cry in a war of words and a book. Bernie or Bust, Pioneers of Electoral Revolt, provides a list of grievances to explain why the people needed a revolution before Trump was elected, and why we the people need to unite against the dominant, pervasive neoliberal order for higher wages, health care coverage for everyone, free college education, saving our planet, ending to imperialism, and, mass incarceration, and the prison industrial complex, a better public education system, and the removal of big money from politics. Let me stop right here.
Yeah. What else do you need to say? Is Donald Trump going to do all those things? Yeah, you should stop right here because you're about to sink yourself.
Tell you why I like this man, Bernie, and why I'm not so much anymore. First, I understand the pervasive neoliberal order. I do not like that. Basically, what I see here is, moralistic, corporate, faux liberalism. They pretend to be for all of these things that pander to your emotions. That is not what I care about. So when Bernie came along as an independent, who was progressive and fought for civil rights, I said, here's a guy who really means it. I respect that. Good. And it's very similar to what people liked about Trump. Now get this, Trump and Bernie shared a lot of policies on free trade, on borders. Bernie is very nationalistic, and he was smeared for it, actually, by socialists. So, higher wages. We do need higher wages. I'm not convinced you can do that with Bernie's policy. Health care coverage for everybody. I'd like that as well. And
Now he's going to go along and tick off all the things and then say, how are you going to pay for that? Which is knee-jerk garbage. What he doesn't acknowledge is labor. He never talks about unions. He never talks about Bernie's statement that he's going to be organizer-in-chief. Because Bernie is going to rile up the unions. He's going to rile up people who aren't yet in unions. He's going to make it easier to join unions. And the labor force is going to get strong enough to cause democracy to happen. The labor force is the engine that drives the whole thing. Bernie can't just wave his hand any more than Elizabeth Warren when she waves her fingers at plutocrats and tells them to behave better. But Bernie knows that we need to organize labor, and then we can get all these things that he's about to tick off as things that he likes. This kid likes these things, but he just doesn't see how it's going to happen. And the part he's leaving out is galvanizing the power of the labor force.
Idealistically, I'm very much for universal health care coverage. I don't see problems with universal fire departments. We seem to manage that just fine. But admittedly, it's
that part is just totally illogical. And they roast him in the comments. If you go under this article, they roast him for that garbage about volunteer fire departments and our fire departments. It's a horrible. He probably would admit that was a stupid thing to say.
Complicated problem, and some people like their coverage, and we can't just take that away from them. So I don't know what you do, and I don't even think Bernie Sanders would solve this. Barack Obama.
Yeah, that's the whole smoke and mirrors about. People like their health insurance companies. No, they don't. People like their doctors sometimes, but they don't like their health insurance providers. And the big Sarah Nelson of the Flight Attendants Union and other strong union leaders have said, no, we would love to have universal health insurance, single payer. It would just make the bargaining process so much easier if that were not on the table every time.
I wanted universal health care. He couldn't get it done either. I don't think you will. Free college education. No, how about college education reform? Just saying free, it's taxpayer. Saving our planet. I'm an environmentalist. I can agree with this to a certain degree.
That's the part I don't get. How can you be an environmentalist and vote for Donald Trump?
But please stop injecting your weird socialism into our environmentalism.
That's just...
Ending to imperialism. Let me rephrase.
Weird socialism. He's just throwing words around that he doesn't understand.
Phrase that, okay? If you want to talk about ending foreign wars and getting, the United States involved in these endless Middle Eastern wars to change governments so that we can get more favorable policy, I'm right there with you.
Good.
Mass incarceration, spot on 100%. And the end of the prison industrial complex, you got me 100% right there, buddy. A better public education system. I agree with that, but I think I disagree on how to get there with you. And the removal of big money from politics, and I agree with that as well. You see, I agree with a lot of this. The problem comes when Bernie goes up on stage and says, white people don't know what it's like to be poor, gives up his stage to these activists, and lets cancel culture wokeness take over, and I say, you do not have the strength required to be president. I'm sorry.
Then he goes on and talks about Elizabeth Warren being a frail little old woman, and she's no way going to be commander-in-chief. And then she may be speaking for Trumpian people. This kid sounds pretty racist right here. And what he's saying sounds racist. And he's appealing to a lot of people. I think a lot of his viewers are racist. And I don't think we're going to touch you. I don't think you're going to... if Bernie says something about white people that they don't know what it feels like to not be white, and that bothers you, then, okay, you're going to vote for Trump. There's not much more I'm going to say to you. But if you're like this kid and you say you're an environmentalist and you want better wages and you want Medicare and you want reform for education, is what he's saying, because education sucks. George Carlin was not he wasn't a left-winger or a right-winger from what I can tell, but he told the truth about education and why it sucks and why it will always suck. And that seems to be where this guy is coming from. But if you can say all these things and then still vote for Trump, I don't get it.
I'm sorry, you've lost me. But Tulsi stepped down from the DNC as a progressive golden child of the Democrats on principle, as a major in the National Guard, and as somebody who posts videos of kickboxing training. That I respect.
Oh, okay.
Strength in character. All right. Our book is a how-to guide for peaceful revolution. It includes 2 exercises voters can use to evaluate candidates on 14 characteristics of fascism. All right, you lost me. You see, this is the problem. We can agree on these policies, but you're nuts when it comes to the paranoid delusions of fascists and Russians.
Okay, now he's mixing things together here. What he doesn't like is that the Democrats have made the word fascism stick to the Republicans. And it is kind of a stretch because fascism is left-wing, not right-wing. My sister Katrina pointed that out to me. And that's a solid point. Fascism is Mussolini. Fascism is left-wing authoritarianism. And so if you have left-wing mixed with authoritarianism as opposed to more like Noam Chomsky, which is more anarchy. If you're a true anarchist, you're not wanting chaos. You're just wanting freedom. And so there are a lot of people on the left who are not authoritarian, and that's great. And there are people on the right also who are not authoritarian, and I get along with them pretty well usually. But what he's saying is he doesn't like the word fascism any more than Bernie people don't like the way the word socialism is used. But so we could use a different word. We could use two different words. We don't need to use the word socialism or fascism, but we can show him that Donald Trump is fascistic and that Bernie Sanders is not. What we're showing is that authoritarianism is rampant in the Democratic Party as well as it is in the Republican Party, and he would agree with that. But what he doesn't want is to hear anything bad about Donald Trump, even if it's true, because he's already, he makes fun of people who are more interested in a horse race than in policy, and rightfully so. He makes fun of those people, but yet he's showing that he's one too by not allowing that word.
And this is what I can't stand. You want to implement any of these things? The first thing you got to do is walk over to Trump supporters and say, hey, how's it going, guys? Want to grab a beer and have a conversation about politics? Guess what? So here's the point. Idealistically, you guys know I'm pretty far left. But realistically, I know that's not possible. Obama couldn't get it done. I see that.
Again, he's missing the power of the labor force, a weaponized labor force, doing wildcat strikes, doing protests, Occupy, Yellow Vest, all that. That's the part he's not seeing. But if he looked at rallies, if he looked at the melee that happened after the Philadelphia Convention that they didn't put on television, if he looked at all the people out in the streets, angry people out in the streets, blocking highways, Black Lives Matter out blocking highways, he probably wouldn't support Black Lives Matter, although I haven't heard him say that. If he could see how revolutionary the people look who are behind Bernie, he might change his tune. He says Obama couldn't get it done. Obama didn't rile people up like Bernie is going to do. I've been to Bernie rallies. I've seen what's going on.
Need to have strong, I will say this, the far left offers up me the big ask opportunity to be like, hey guys, it's us or them, right? You want the crazy socialists calling fascists ever, or do you want the more moderate left-leaning individual who wants a public option in healthcare? So I get it. And this is why a lot of conservatives have been saying not to give an inch, because it keeps incrementing in a certain direction. Here's what I think. I think you got to give a little, get a little. I think there are a lot of things I don't know. I think I'm wrong about a lot of things. And I think even if
Let's leave it there. Yes, you are. Here's one thing you're wrong about. Thomas Piketty, the French economist behind 2014's game-changing Capital and the 21st Century, that's a book a new book, Capital and Ideology, out in France now, coming out in English. Everyone's excited for the English edition. It uses the same long-run economic series that Capital 21C benefited from to understand the relationship between wealth and ideology. It's not enough, according to Piketty, to use class to understand how people vote. So it's not a simple class war. You also have to take account of people's beliefs about class. And that's where you can really look at the traditional Democrats, the centrist neoliberal Democrats, and you can understand why they're so out of touch and how they don't understand why Bernie is the threat that he is. They don't even know what's going on in the lower classes. This is a neat way of resolving the tension between traditional left class analysis and contemporary identitarian theories. So we're talking about identity politics. If we can get him to read this article, he's in agreement about identity politics. He has been the victim of this trick here, or this conflict here, in the way traditionally we've looked at class. And then here are some really smart bullet points from the slide deck. I've referenced the slide deck of a 2019 presentation where he's talking about the Brahmin left versus the merchant right. And he says it's very accessible. It is, but it's dense. It's a lot of data. But these bullet points right here are golden. If you want to understand this study, you can look at this graph, which is really helpful, and you can look at these bullet points. Initially, left parties represented low education, low opportunity workers, while right parties represented the capital and professional classes. So workers used to be left-wingers. Over time, left parties made progress in advancing opportunities for some low-income workers and shifted to representing the interests of high education, socially liberal elites, whom Piketty calls the Brahmin left. So we've got some meritocracy starting here, as some of the workers advanced and others didn't. And that's where you've got the bigotry on the left, that people believe they've risen to a certain level because they deserve it. You know, I understand where they're coming from, but then they build a moat around their success and they try to keep everyone out, just like the right-wingers have done. The right parties, meanwhile, become even more entrenched in representing the interests of the merchant right. Both factions embrace market-driven ideas: globalism, migration, dismantling of trade protections, including the social safety net that stood in the way of global competitiveness. So they both became less humane. It left low opportunity, low education people in increasingly dire straits. That's what Democrats don't understand. They're pressed by lowering wages and reduced social safety nets. The Brahmin left largely abandoned its universalist egalitarian platform in favor of a meritocratic one that joined the right parties in a semi-eugenic belief in some people's innate superiority. There's the bigotry. And Noam Chomsky is really good at describing this, how we've got the meritocracy people causing most of the problems that working class people see and causing them, and then being unwilling to try to solve them, other than to pay lip service or finger wagging like Elizabeth Warren does. The Brahmin left parties want to tax the merchant right at slightly higher levels to pay for operas and universities. That really puts it well, but are otherwise okay with globalism, a tax on trade unions, etc. That sounds like a lot of my university professor friends. They're right here with the Brahmin left. They don't really give a shit about the middle and the lower education and income people. Low education, low opportunity workers stop showing up at the polls. That's what I noticed when I was canvassing for Bernie last time. We go around in the neighborhood I used to live in, 80% Hispanic, and we would knock on doors, and you see people who are hurting. You see people who are in a difficult place in terms of paying the rent every month, in terms of medical problems, all kinds of medical problems that there's no way to pay for. And you ask them, have you heard about Bernie Sanders? And they look at you and they say, oh, I don't vote. I don't vote. And you're like, what? And that's the disconnect between the voting class and the people that Piketty is studying. I don't vote. And there's a reason. There's no belief that voting is going to fix anything. And for probably 100 years, it hasn't really, in terms of this problem with the lower opportunity, lower education and income. But really say opportunity, that's where it comes down to. We are not a country with the American dream where you can rise up if you have the gumption, if you have the pluck, if you have the intelligence, if you have the drive. It's not true. We don't have social mobility compared to a lot of other countries. From what I've read recently, we're about halfway up on the list, if that. So low education, low opportunity workers stop showing up at the polls, and there's been a collapse in their participation in politics. They don't know what's going on. And this also made the two factions increasingly indifferent to their needs. So why should we pay attention to them, say Democrats and Republicans, if they're not going to vote? The merchant right has reactivated these voters, and this is the part that makes the traditional Democrats lose their shit. The merchant right has reactivated these voters by appealing to their racism, blaming foreigners, blaming welfare moms, blaming immigrants. All of this is the way that the right-wingers, the merchant right, have activated the voting base. So if the left wants to combat this, they're going to have to activate without using racism, without what the left needs to do is appeal, like they used to do. They need to appeal to the voters based on their desire to fix things for them. And that's where activating the labor force in Bernie's plan is key. That's what we really need to do. Now, the merchant right don't mind at all what's going on here. They're appealing to their racism, and it's been devastatingly effective. It's like getting turkeys to vote for Thanksgiving. You're getting the turkeys to vote against their own interests. And the merchant right, the Republican Party is fine with poor people voting against their own interests. Since the French Revolution, the merchant right have justified their wealth and privilege with a belief in their innate superiority. That's where the supremacy comes in, and styled themselves as destined to govern over their social lessers. That sounds like the Third Reich. Live as though it were the first pages of an Ayn Rand novel. Where Piketty gets the most interesting is in speculating about where this might lead. Elites, he notes, tend to club together to defend their interests, so he wonders if the Brahmin left and merchant right might not form a single bloc. Dude, that's already happened. They're already a single bloc. They're a duopoly. The Democrats and the Republicans are the same snake with two different heads. Or will there be a new deal that racist left parties, and yes, the Democrat Party is a racist left party. They don't want their kids to go to schools with other people's kids. They don't want to pay for other people's kids to get a good education. They're just as racist. They just have a few signaling things they say about abortion or about gay marriage, but they're just as racist as the right wing. He also notes that since elections are increasingly won by none of the above, that is, the decisive factor isn't who voters vote for, it's which voters don't vote at all. That's the big point. There's an opportunity for a new egalitarian left to rise and rise, buoyed by voters who have been abandoned by Brahmin left and neoliberal right. This idea that racist left parties will incidentally lift the fortune of all workers, I don't know that that's going to happen. He's talking about that here. I don't think it can happen within the Democratic Party we have now. I think we need to weaponize the labor force and overhaul the Democratic Party, completely change it. Otherwise, we have to go outside the party. That's the bargain that Bernie made with the devil, because he tried to be an independent over his entire career, and that didn't work out. So he made this Faustian deal, and then people yell at the Bernie or busters, and they say, well, Bernie wouldn't want you to be Bernie or bust. But we didn't make the deal with the Democrats. Bernie made the deal, and we're here to save him from the consequences. We don't want him to have to hand his violin over to the devil. And then, so when he endorsed Hillary, that was a painful moment. I'm sure you remember it. We don't want him to have to endorse the Hillary replacement, the hand-picked Hillary surrogate, Elizabeth Warren. We don't want that to happen. So don't tell us what Bernie wants. Bernie doesn't want to endorse, he didn't want to endorse Hillary. He doesn't want to endorse Elizabeth. I don't care what anyone says. And that will come out eventually. I think we'll see that. But we've got to get him the nomination. So this article, we've got to, these bullet points are really good in understanding a fairly data-drenched topic. Now, back to this video. I said that the Tim draws some correct conclusions, but the final conclusion is way off. He doesn't want to hear that Trump is on the same team as Obama, the Clintons, Reagans, Bush, and Nixon. He thinks Trump is outside of the neoliberal and the fascists, and also I didn't say this earlier, he underestimates young people. We all may be underestimating how many will vote if Bernie gets the nomination. Bernie has been, after his heart attack, he's come out and he seems to understand that the days are numbered and he wants to make as big of an impact as he can. And young people have always responded well to him, but there's a new surge of emotion. If you watch his videos recently, they're really emotional. And I think the kids I teach, I'm a college professor, so I'm teaching university students, they are noticing this change in Bernie, and they're getting excited. And I think if he lights a fire, we've got millions of potential voters who typically don't vote. And I think he has time between now and July. I think he can get them energized and activated. Now I want to point you to, without going there, I want to point you to this website, citizensagainstplutocracy.org, and there's a clear analysis of Trump's fascistic tendencies versus Bernie's. There are 14 points. Victor Tiffany goes down all 14 points. He compares Trump to Bernie in ways, on criteria, 14 criteria that we should be able then to say what fascism is. And if we differ a little bit, that's one thing. But if we define the word fascism and what we mean by it, it's pretty easy to show that Trump and Clinton and Obama are pretty high on the fascism list, pretty much the same, I think. That in my analysis, when I go through the 14 points, I don't see much difference. And Bernie makes a horrible fascist. Bernie is not very high at all on the fascism scale, because if you take the political compass and you go left, right, and up and down, Bernie is down. He is not high authoritarian. He's very high democracy. He wants the labor force to have a say in its own lifestyle, and he wants to give power to the labor force. And that's what democracy is all about. It's not democracy if a few oligarchs are running things. So then another place I'll point you that I've already pointed you is a new article that summarizes in bullet points 6 categories of Sanders supporters who will not vote for a Democrat in the general election. So I'll link to that. And I've already presented videos on those points, but it hasn't been in writing. So you can go through, you can share this article, this Medium article, and get to all the kinds of voters, not just the Piketty voters, but also the young voters and Democratic Socialists of America. But I've gone through that already, so I'll go on here. And here's the article I talked about that derives the bullet points from Piketty's slideshow. The DNC well understands that nominating Biden or Warren is a potent form of voter suppression. Bernie or bust is the solution. We are guaranteeing, this is what I said to Victor Tiffany last night in a chat we had, we are guaranteeing that they will get Trump, and we are guaranteeing that the planet, therefore, will be destroyed, and it's all their fault. Sounds like a dystopian novel for sure, and it's the only choice. And that's a bleak way of putting it, and Victor was right to disagree with that. And I went on to say, there is no way for us to be reasonable and sound like grown-ups because we are well past that point. We have about 12 to 15 years to turn around the planet crisis. That's another video, but it's true. And then Victor says, we aren't doing that. The Bernie or Trumpers alone are doing that. We're the ones sounding the alarm. We're only announcing the foregone conclusion based on the factions from 2016, current polling, and Piketty's poor, as well as Bernie's army using the Burn app. So Bernie is able to get out the voters that traditionally won't vote. We have rarefied information that shifts our job from demanding revolution to Paul Revere type activism. So instead of being babies about it, not being the grown-ups, what we're saying is there are enough people using this leverage who aren't even Bernie or busters, and we're sounding the alarm. We're trying to tell you, Democrats, it's already too late. And that's what Max Blumenthal says too. It's already too late. That's what Tim says. It's already too late. You've already lost, because they already know that there's no intention with the non-populist Democrats to allow Bernie the nomination. They've got the superdelegates all ready to wade in. They have lots of candidates so they can make sure it's a contested convention. And they're planning again to hand it to Elizabeth Warren, Hillary's handpicked successor. And so if that happens, yeah, you can, and it looks like it's going to happen. I hate to sound so bleak. And we're Paul Revere riding through the towns trying to warn you, it's too late. You've already lost because you already intend not to nominate Bernie Sanders. And then afterwards, we have a terrible, we're going to be saying, we told you so. And we said that last time, we told you so. It's not going to be fun unless we can wake you up somehow. One if by land, two if by sea. Well, both parties suck. You have to wake up and you have to nominate Bernie. That's all I got. I don't know what else to say other than that. Go to these articles. Go to this webpage. This is the Citizens Against Plutocracy, comparing Sanders and Trump on fascism, the F word. We've got a chapter in the book of, Victor has a chapter in the book about what fascism is. And then here's the article, 6 categories of Sanders supporters who will not vote for a Democrat. And you aren't going to get this information in a succinct form. You're not going to get it in any form on the New York Times or MSDNC or the Washington Post. Or so share this article too, and this video. And we'll hope Max gets out of the trouble he's in. That's another, you should watch Jimmy Dore's take on Max Blumenthal. This is an article, I hope you could read this too, The Gray Zone, Max Blumenthal on why Hillary Clinton smeared Tulsi Gabbard, and then another one about the trumped up charges about why they jailed him for 20 hours. All right, this is a big job that we have, getting the word out. Please share all this information with your friends. Understand it. If they don't have the patience to watch a video this long, you can boil it down for them. You can keep talking. They'll say the talking points from corporate news, and then you can say, there are other news sources, and this is what I've discovered. And maybe we'll get somewhere. But we don't have much time. We only have a few months. We only have until February, really, to turn the tide. And then from those months, from February to July, that's when it's helter-skelter. And we'll see what happens. Fasten your seatbelts and keep on burning.
Get on board the Bernier bus train. Come get on board the Bernier bus train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Oh, get on board